Hey everybody, so a couple weeks ago I did a video about why we left Florida, and I'm going to talk today about why we chose Oklahoma. A lot of the reasons why we chose Oklahoma is because it was basically the opposite of Florida. So I want to go into those a little bit more in detail. If you do see me looking down though, it's because I actually have notes, so I want to make sure I cover all the points here. So the biggest reason why my husband and I chose Oklahoma is because God called us here. Back in 2019, when we came to Oklahoma, we were actually a few counties north of here, but even then, being in that county, a few counties north of here, I knew that Oklahoma was where we were supposed to be. It just felt right. So there was that. So aside from all the other stuff I'm going to talk about, the biggest reason why we chose Oklahoma is because this is where God called us. Now, outside of that, there's a lot of, I guess, more personal or more in the world, physical type reasons outside the spiritual stuff, why we chose Oklahoma. So number one, and this isn't in order, this is kind of an order of importance to us, but it's just things we like about here. Lower cost of living. While it has gone up in the last few years, or even in the last year, the housing and land market here in Oklahoma has gone up quite a bit. It still has a lower cost of living. So like a year and a half ago, when my husband and I were looking at property here in Oklahoma, it was about $1,000 to $1,500 an acre. When we bought property back in February, it was like $3,000 an acre. So obviously it's gone up, but in Florida, you're looking at least where we were living, and we were living in a non-city area, so it's actually cheaper than a lot of places in Florida. We were looking at $20,000, $35,000 an acre. So $3,000, $35,000, big, huge difference. So we could actually afford the kind of property that we always wanted in Oklahoma. We couldn't afford it in Florida. And even when the housing market was lower in Florida, we still couldn't afford the kind of property that we wanted. So cost of living is much lower here than in Florida. Homeschooling and then public schooling as well. I'm going to cover both of those. With homeschooling, because we are a homeschool family, that was a biggie for us. What were the laws and regulations like in the state we were moving to? There are none. Absolutely none. I just teach my kids. I don't register my kids with the school board in the county that we're in. I don't do yearly evaluations, nothing. There is nothing I have to do to prove that I'm teaching my child. Now, to some people I know that can seem like a really negative thing, like, oh my gosh, how do you know? Well, I know. And while I know not all parents are like me, and some people, even, mind you though, even in the state of Florida, where you did have those regulations, where you had to submit a portfolio at the end of the year and prove that your child's learning and everything, even with those kind of regulations, there are children that can still fall through the cracks. So even with all the regulation in the world, that still happens. That still happens in public schooling. Children still fall through the cracks. But I know I'm teaching my children very well. I know that I am teaching them the way that's best for them, and I don't have to prove that to anybody, and I like that. Now, when it comes to public schooling, because I know homeschooling, that's a smaller population than public schooling. With public schooling in this county, they still pray in their classrooms, and they still talk about the Bible. So the Bible and faith are still a part of the classroom up here in Oklahoma, which for me, if I was putting my children in public school, is a big deal for me. That's one of the things that we didn't like about public schooling. There's a lot of things we didn't like about public schooling in Florida. That's why we never chose public schooling for our kids. But that was one of the big things that I really do like about up here. If for some reason we ever chose to put our kids in public schooling, we know that faith and God would still be talked about in their school. Medical freedom, that's a biggie. So, in a lot of different states, parents do not have the final say in what happens to their children medically. I'm sure there's been plenty of, medical kidnapping cases that we've heard about in the past. I remember one years and years ago, before I even had children, in Massachusetts. It was basically, I think the family didn't like the way the hospital was caring for their daughter who was really, really sick. So they wanted to go to a different hospital. Well, the one they were at didn't like that, and basically told the parents, you have no rights, you can't do anything, we're keeping your child against your will. It happened in Florida. There was a case in Florida just a couple years ago where parents had a child who was diagnosed with cancer. They went through chemotherapy. They went through the first round of chemo. The child was had the test after the first round of chemo, was deemed cancer-free, no more cancer. And so they're like, okay, great. Well, the doctor said, you still have to do the second round of chemo. And at that point, they're like, well, we'd like to get a second opinion. After that point, their child was taken from them for a year. So, and the child went through the second round of chemo, didn't see his parents for a year, just this whole mess. Like, it was just a mess. And so up here in Oklahoma, you have the final say in all things that medically happen with your children. So medical kidnapping does not happen, or should not theoretically happen in the state of Oklahoma, because you do have, like, us as parents, when I took Aubrey to the hospital for her broken wrist, my oldest daughter, if I wanted a second opinion on something, I could have gotten it and not received some kind of persecution for wanting a second opinion for my daughter's wrist. So there's that. Medical freedom. Guns. Constitutional carry and open carry in the state of Oklahoma. When we moved up here, my gun started living on my hip. Open carry. I go to Walmart, my gun's out. I go to the lumber store, my gun's out, and everything else. Going to the fast food place, I'm wearing my gun. You can wear your gun, banks and stuff like that. They still have those rules where no guns kind of deal. But it's open carry and constitutional carry in the state of Oklahoma, which we really like. All right, less populated. That's a biggie, because that was a big thing for us in Florida. We did not like how populated Florida was. Florida was already really populated before COVID happened, and then after COVID, just everybody started flooding to Florida. Oh gosh, guys, it was a mess. Absolute mess. So it is a lot less populated up here. I'm pretty sure in the county we live in, we have more cattle than we do people. Specifically in the part of the county we live in, and this isn't for the entire county, but for the part of the county we live in, the school that's, that we're technically zoned for, they have a graduating class of 10 to 25 students, which is just crazy, because I was in like a mid-sized school when I graduated high school, and that was like 15 years ago, and it was like 400 kids or something like that, or no, yeah, I think it was like 400. It was crazy. We had a whole bunch of people that graduated. But it's less populated. You don't have to worry as much about traffic incidences and stuff like that, because there's just less people on the road. And going into that with the traffic thing, I have not been cut off or tailgated or anything. Nothing like negative driving wise. I haven't had to slam on my brakes because somebody decided to all of a sudden slam on their brakes or anything like that since we've moved here, which has been amazing, because where we lived in Florida, I was getting cut off all the time. I was getting tailgated all the time. People were brake checking me all the time. And I'm like a very good driver because I have children. I'm not going to be some crazy person driving. And it was still nuts. So it's been nice that we haven't had to deal with that at all since we've been up here. Also, the people in general are just super duper nice. Like super nice. Like the ladies at one of our favorite places to go eat. They always like to say to my girls, "Hey sister, how you doing? Like, what would you like to eat today?" Like talking to my daughters. And they're little girls, and like they're just so happy and bubbly and chatty. Like I have yet to meet a cranky person living up here, and it's been 3 months, almost 4. No cranky people. I mean, everybody's got a bad day and everything like that. I mean, I know that, but overall, everybody here is just very nice, very hospitable. We have literally been invited to like 6 different churches. My husband got invited to a church by the mechanic's assistant at the mechanic shop that he was taking his truck to. We've been invited to church by neighbors. We've been invited to church by fellow homeschoolers that we've met, things like that. It's just been, everybody just invites you to church. We were already associated with the church when we moved up here, our ministry, so we obviously haven't taken up people on those opportunities, but it was really nice to have, even our realtor and stuff inviting us to their churches. It was a nice difference from a lot of things we had in Florida. Another one that we really like is permits. In Florida, you have to pull a permit for basically everything. You want to fix your deck or add a deck off the back of your house that no one can even see, you have to pull a permit. You have to pull a permit basically for everything you do in your house in Florida, or at least you're supposed to. In here, up here in Oklahoma, I don't know about the rest of Oklahoma, but I know that specifically the county we live in, if you live within city limits, there's typically permits or things like that you kind of have to pull. If you're in the country like we are, nothing. No permits, no extra taxes you have to pay, nothing. Nothing whatsoever. No permits that we're having to pull. We're trying to put in an electrical hookup for our RV. No permits. When we go to start building a house, no permits. No nothing. It's amazing. We're not taxed to death, which is amazing. Which helps with that lower cost of living because we don't have to pay taxes on 18 million different things, which is just so nice. Yeah, the roads kind of suck around here. Like The roads we have to use to get to our property are all paved. But there's potholes galore, but I don't care. I don't have to pay tons of taxes. I'll deal with the potholes. You know, they fix them occasionally. I don't care. So that's really nice. There's a lot less taxing. Also, when we bought our property, now, obviously we bought our property for more than what the person did when they ever owned this property. Literally, the road we live on is named after the person who owned this property before us. So this property could have been in that family for generations, for all I know. But when we bought the property, we owned 40 acres. The taxes on the property at the time were $32 a year. A year, guys, $32 a year for 40 acres. And now obviously it's going to go up some because we obviously spent a lot more money than that on the property than he did, you know, however many years ago. But still, I know I've seen the taxes for around the price that we paid for this property. It's still like around $100, if not less. We were paying like $2,000 a year in taxes between city taxes, because we did live within city limits in Florida, and county taxes. It was well over $2,000 a year for a third of an acre and a 1,200 square foot house. Over $2,000. And we're going to be spending maybe like $100 or so here a year for 40 acres. Obviously, that's going to go up once we start building a home and everything else. We know that, but still it's going to be way, 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 way less than $2,000 a year. So taxes are much better. Last couple things, police force. So I know the whole police talk and everything is kind of a big deal right now. There's a lot of things going on with police, like all over the country, just in general. But around here, there's barely any cops. Like, there's barely any. I think for the part of the town we live in, there's 3. And I know for other parts of the county that we have friends that live in, there's like 3 cops. Like, not just like, oh, there's 3 cops each shift. No, 3 cops, period. Like, that's it. That's all they have. In our city area, when I say city, I mean like, you know, there's, 5 buildings, and they're not, they all basically look like old houses that were renovated into the post office or whatever. It is the city hall, I think the water department, and the cops are in one building, and it is literally an older home that has been turned into those facilities that's within our city limits in the area we live in. It's amazing. Now, mind you, you do have to understand that you're not going to, if you have an emergency, you're not going to necessarily have somebody like knocking at your door immediately. So you have to be mentally prepared and aware for that kind of thing. That's why I've talked about medical preps on your property when you're living out in the country, because you're not going to necessarily have some sort of first responder knocking at your door or something bad happens. But the nice thing about here is the crime rate. I mean, there's obviously still crime. There's still drugs. There's still shootings. There's still stuff like that. Stuff like that still does happen, but it's obviously way less because it's way less populated. And also, people are pretty good about policing themselves, too. Like, we had a neighbor when we first moved here. He owns about 150 acres across the street from us. Been here forever kind of deal. And he said to us, like, he'll keep an eye out on the property, because he knew we weren't going to be living on the property immediately when we bought it. He said, I'll keep an eye out for you on the property. Everybody around here already kind of knows that I keep an eye on the area. And if I see anybody on your property that's not you or someone you've told me will be on your property, he's like, I'll go on the property and talk to them. And we said, okay, sure, thanks. So people around here aren't afraid to approach other people and be like, what the heck are you doing and why are you here, if they don't think they're supposed to be here. So it's kind of nice to have that and have that kind of community where, like, I know my neighbors have my back. Like, I know if something's going on and we need help, like, there's one of our neighbors that lives literally next door to us. He has the 80 acres next to us. That if something was going on and, like, say my husband wasn't here and I needed help with something, I could call him, because he actually he has a mechanic shop on his property. I could just say, hey, I need your help, and he would be here. And we have friends that would be here too, but the guy literally lives next door. But we have multiple neighbors like that I could reach out to. So it's nice to know that you have more of a sense of community. And yes, we leave each other alone, but at the same time, we're there for each other if we need it. And I never really felt like I had that really in Florida. Like, we had neighbors that were amazing in the downtown area we lived in, like, absolutely wonderful. And I knew if we needed something, they would be there to help us. But at the same time, there's only so much you can honestly do in the downtown area too. Like, you're not going to have some of the instances we could have out here necessarily happening in a downtown area, and vice versa. But it's nice to know that living out here in the middle of nowhere, where there's not a lot of police presence, that there are people that are willing to help. So that's always nice. And the final thing, and this really may not mean much of anything to anybody except for maybe my husband and I, but you can be buried on your property in Oklahoma. And this goes for the entire state. So our neighbor, actually, his parents, he owns the 80 acres next to us and a house across the street too. Both his parents actually died last year, and they're buried on the property, the 80 acres next door, because that's where they lived at the time. There's actually an old cemetery, an Indian cemetery actually, on that 80 acres that he owns, that he just kind of inherited when he bought the property several years ago. But for my husband and I, that's actually kind of a big thing. My husband and I have always pretty much wanted to be buried on our land. We didn't want to go be in some cemetery, or anything like that. So again, that may not mean anything to anybody, but it's really cool to us that if we, whenever the time comes for us to pass, that we can stay at our home, and where our bodies anyway can stay here and be here, and not in some cemetery or anything like that. And our children will know that. They will be known that will be our wishes and everything else. But I just think it's really cool that in the state of Oklahoma, you can still be buried on your property. In Florida, you can do that. That'd probably creep a lot of people out, because a lot of people have really tiny properties. So you can do that in Florida, but you can't do that here in Oklahoma. So that's it, guys. I'm sure there's something for everybody there that kind of touches on something. But the big thing for us in Oklahoma is there is a lot more freedom. There's a lot more freedom mindset. But going with that, though, you have to be open to, if you know you have that freedom, like I know there aren't going to be cops that, if something happens here, there's not going to be necessarily cops that can come immediately. If there's an emergency, something happens here on the homestead, I don't even know when EMS would get here. I don't even think we have EMS in the area, in the part of the county we live in. There's no EMS. So with that freedom also comes responsibility. You have to like that kind of lifestyle, and you have to be responsible enough to know that you are potentially going to be the first responder to situations on your homestead, or you may be the first responder to a car accident. We've had several friends up here who have been first responders to car accidents because they've seen the car accident happen and they've gotten there before the cops even did. And they were able to render aid because they've taken medical first responder type classes. So it's one of those things that it's definitely a different way of life up here. It's very much so kind of like the 60s and 70s, more so the 60s, I guess. Very, very, very different kind of lifestyle than Florida, but I absolutely love it. But again, you have to have that mindset of that's the kind of life you want for you and your family. Because if you want to come up here and live in some big city and do big city type things, it ain't gonna work. It's very much so, you be a good neighbor, we'll be a good neighbor, we won't have any problems. And we've told all our neighbors why we've moved up here. They all know God called us up here, and they have no problems with us whatsoever, and they have no problems with some of the other people that moved in this area. But you know what, if we started doing some bad stuff on this property, I'm sure we'd have some issues with them. That's fine, it's just the way it is. But it's one of those things, guys. Oklahoma's a great place to live. We love it here. It's got a lot of pluses, and like I said, the biggest reason why we moved here is because God told us to come here, and there's obviously a reason behind that, past just what I listed off. So something to think about, guys. Think about where you're living. Think about where you're living, where you want to raise your family for the rest of your life. Does where you're living align with your morals and your standards? Does it align with how you want your children to be raised? And things like that. So just something to think about, guys. Hope y'all have a great day.